On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Foundation for the Carolinas, inspiring philanthropy and empowering individuals to create a better community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte-Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
New Orleans was wild. It still is a wild place. Anything goes. And it was a great place for me. When I was in high school in New Orleans, I thought in order to be a successful gay man, I had to learn to like opera. And so I started ushering at the opera. I didn't particularly like opera, but I really liked intermission. And it was really fun to see everybody there. And it was just an amazing event. I can stop there, but I can tell you one other story. There was one time I was sitting in my seat after we'd finished ushering because we got to sit down, and I got a note from backstage from one of the singers that I should meet him afterwards. It was really fun to go to these events. You just never knew what was going to happen. That was not what was happening in Wilmington.
Tom Warshauer is Assistant Director, Community Engagement for the City of Charlotte's Housing and Neighborhood Services Department. Over a 29-year career, Tom has worked with business and neighborhood groups to enhance quality of life in Charlotte. He is an American Leadership Forum Fellow and has served on several community councils and boards, including as chair of the Community Building Initiative and as a founding board member of Equality North Carolina, the Wesley Mancini Foundation, and the Charlotte Lesbian and Gay Fund. He is a Human Rights Commission Charlotte Chapter's Legacy Award honoree for fostering equity in the Charlotte community. In this episode, we explore community engagement, neighborhood development, growing up in Wilmington and New Orleans, and celebrating diverse and authentic lives. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Tom, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Tom, you work for the government. What do you do?
I'm a bureaucrat. I work for the City of Charlotte's Housing and Neighborhood Services Department, and I manage community engagement. And that really means that I work with neighborhoods and I work with people in our community to help them develop the kinds of neighborhoods, the kinds of communities they want to live in. And I do that through a whole range of programs where we help people understand where they're living, understand how the government works that might support changes that they want in their community, and then help them to meet each other and then to execute on that and building the kind of community they want. One of the things I've noticed about government is that we can build streets and sidewalks and collect your garbage and arrest your neighbor or put out your fire. But we can't make you like one another. We can't make you get to know one another in your neighborhood. Only people can build a community and get to know one another and like one another. And that's what we're about, is helping people become engaged in each other's lives and help each other. And that's what I do.
Tom, that is an interesting government charge, that you're about the business of helping people get along. Do you consider that to be the directive of your department?
I think that's pretty much the directive of my section. Now, our department does housing and helps people find adequate and safe housing. We do code enforcement, where we make sure that people are abiding by codes and zoning. We do 311, where we answer questions and direct people to services that they need. But in my area, is one of the things I really love about it is sort of the carrot. We're not the stick. We're not the enforcement agency. We're the people that help you do the things that you want to do in your community. And we provide funds for you that enable you to get out of line, so that if you want to do something that is not a high priority in some of our programs, we provide you the funds to do that. Because what we believe is that when people work together, they not only get to know each other and build community, but they make their community safer. They know who should be in the neighborhood and who shouldn't be in the neighborhood. They know that the moving van shouldn't be there because the people are out of town, they're not moving. They know the neighbor who is sick and they can help them mow the lawn instead of calling us to give them a ticket for having overgrown weeds. They know who's a good babysitter. They help each other find jobs, who's a good employer. And there's studies that have shown that people that are a part of communities make better career decisions. So particularly in low-income communities where we have low social capital, funding them to people to do projects where they work together increases their social capital and makes their demands on social services less. So it's a good thing for the individual to be able to do things that they want to do, but it's a good thing for the community to have people working together. One of the other things I think has been fascinating was that a lot of studies had shown that the first responders, we often think of as the police, the fire department, the first responder is really your neighbor. After an emergency, the police might not be able to get through because of down power lines or trees. In Chicago, when there was a heat wave, people that were connected to their neighbors survived. People that were not, many of the older people died. No one came to check on them. So the first responder really is the people in your neighborhood, and getting to know them makes the neighborhood safer and better for everyone.
Tom, you spoke about how residents feel about their neighborhood and their neighbors. How do you know how residents feel?
Well, we ask people sort of what's going on with them. We look at data, and the data might tell us one set of stories about what's going on in a neighborhood. But neighbors may have another set of skills and another set of stories about what they want. One of the examples that we've often given is in Winterfield. They wanted to do a string project. And there's probably no study that would have suggested that teaching string orchestra instruments to an elementary school would be a solution to neighborhood and community building. But there was someone in that school that loved string instruments and that had a connection to the symphony, and they developed a string orchestra in elementary school in a Hispanic and very international community. And it really worked. So really listening to neighbors about what they're passionate about and following those passions is usually the best solution, as opposed to sort of saying you need an after-school program that teaches math. To let people sort of say, this is a talent I have that I want to offer, and then figuring out a way to make that happen. And that's what we try and do, is take the lead from people in the neighborhoods about what they're most interested in and let them be the leader. There's so much of how government money is spent where you don't get to determine it. But in these programs, the neighbors are really in charge.
I'm interested in this distinction between how residents feel subjectively about their neighborhood and what might be the objective facts on the ground. For example, what if a neighborhood is perfectly satisfied with their neighborhood, but objectively on the ground, there may be quality of life issues that raise concern? Or the reverse, where a neighborhood is well-to-do, but the neighbors are unhappy?
As we look at sort of the data of what's going on in neighborhoods, we try and make neighbors aware of what's going on and look at how they respond. And one of the things that we have noticed is that many of the data points that are available to us are really tied to poverty. But being in an impoverished neighborhood is not necessarily being in a bad neighborhood. And people that were in those neighborhoods that were impoverished, that often had bad data, were tired of being labeled as threatened and fragile neighborhoods. And when we expanded the data, we expanded our ability to look at what was good and bad in a neighborhood. So we took a look at, why do we have this data set? Why don't we have a bigger set of data that can talk about more things in communities than what we were looking at? And we expanded the data set very intentionally to include a lot of environmental data. And when you look at environmental data, what's a good neighborhood and a bad neighborhood totally flip. The poor neighborhoods usually ride transit, have smaller homes, consume less per capita electricity and water. They live much more lightly on the earth. They often have sidewalks and smaller lots. The big neighborhoods, the wealthy neighborhoods, look green, but a front yard is not a great ecosystem. They're consuming a lot of electricity, and even if they're driving Priuses, they're still consuming a lot more gas and doing a lot more polluting than the people in the poor neighborhoods. So it makes us really think, what is good and what is bad? And let's sort of rethink what we think a neighborhood might be and provide more data so that people can take more actions. We care about things we measure, or we measure things that we care about. And we needed to have a richer data set that would enable us to care and really reveal more about neighborhoods that are rich neighborhoods and more about neighborhoods that are poor. And a lot of health statistics and violence statistics are very interesting as well. We'll often report violent crime, but people in poor neighborhoods tend to kill each other. People in wealthy neighborhoods tend to kill themselves. But we don't look too much at suicide and the conditions that wealthy neighborhoods might have that really lend themselves to more suicides. And one of the things that happened after the economic downturn, I was with some police and they were telling me this. They said that people in wealthy neighborhoods, when they lose their job, they can't imagine how they could live on half of their salary. And it's so depressing that they off themselves. So sometimes living in these wealthy neighborhoods is not the best solution. When they get divorces, they don't have a place to go. They're really threatened by their loss of status. A good neighborhood in that way is not necessarily a healthier neighborhood emotionally, or perhaps even a healthier neighborhood in terms of safety. So it's important that we look more broadly at neighborhoods and what those qualities of neighborhoods are about people caring for one another.
Which data points are most significant to you?
Well, I love looking at some of the environmental data because I think it makes a richer conversation. I like looking at data. I think is important for me is where do people send their kids to neighborhood schools. Also like to look at the data around children and education. How well are the children doing in that neighborhood?
Tom, I want to come back to these data points. When we began our conversation, you emphasized the subjective feelings of the residents in neighborhoods. Are these subjective feelings a basis for you doing your work?
Well, to some extent, they are. I mean, what people feel about their community really matters. Actually, there have been some studies that have shown that particularly in low-income communities, how people feel and talk about your neighborhood matters in terms of academic performance. That if you come from a neighborhood that people like and speak well of, it really helps your own self-esteem. It's hard to build a sense of self-esteem, a sense of confidence. And if everyone is talking your neighborhood down, parents may be in prison, you may not be high socioeconomic status, your neighborhood isn't thought of well, what's going on in your life that's good? But if I can provide some data points that said, you may not be the wealthiest neighborhood, but look at the places you're doing really well. Maybe you're voting, maybe you're recycling, maybe you all are all riding transit. If I can show some places that say you all are really successful in these areas, that you should be proud of your community. And we all should be proud of our communities. One of the things that I've been really interested in is the extent to which you hear politicians all across the country being so proud that they came from poverty. Most everyone has a grandfather or father or their own personal situation where they've risen from poverty. There's hardly a politician, even Mitt Romney, who grew up in great affluence, talks about eating dinner on an ironing board in school. We all have this notion of building ourselves, of lifting us up. But then as soon as we escape poverty, we don't want our children to hang out with people that are poor. We need to have more stories that remind people that the struggle and the people who are struggling, many of those people are going to be destined for greatness. And many of the people that grow up in affluence are not. And if you go to a lot of the graduations of kids from some of the most affluent schools in Charlotte and most of the affluent schools throughout all of America, not all those kids are thriving. So your personal situation, even though it may have some adversity, might be a very rich ground. And there are amazing people in most every neighborhood in Charlotte. They're fantastic teachers. They're people that teach piano lessons. They're people that are amazing singers in their churches. They're fantastic people in every community. And we need to be celebrating all people that are fantastic.
What are common concerns of neighborhoods?
Well, some of our most popular grants are neighborhood identification. People want to tell people where they live and they want to be proud of their community. Most all suburban neighborhoods have a lot of money is spent on their entrance sign. Most urban neighborhoods are sort of lined with retail. In many instances, it's not doing well. So putting out sign toppers and entrances to neighborhoods is really important to people. They want people to understand their neighborhood and to love it. After that, we're seeing a lot of interest in things like community gardens, festivals, and things that really help with kids, and things like little free libraries, things on the corners where people share books, sharing things, really important and popular as well. And now what we're seeing a lot of are art projects. People want murals. They want to be able to tell stories. They want buildings that are unattractive to be beautiful. They want utility boxes covered. So we're seeing a lot of grants in the art world, which is fabulous, of sort of telling the story of their community.
Is there a neighborhood in Charlotte that you think is really getting it right?
I think there are some neighborhoods that have a long history of having done things right. I think Dilworth did a lot with their newsletters and protecting who they were and their own signage and got it right. I think Plaza Midwood has done a lot of that and has gotten it right. I think Noda has worked really hard to become a community that celebrates itself. And I think there are a number of neighborhoods, particularly Washington Heights with Mattie Marshall, that have gotten it right, that really work together to build their communities. University Village has done a lot of great work. There are quite a number of neighborhoods that have done different kinds of things that have done well. We have some amazing activists also down in South Charlotte and on Montford and East Charlotte too. The Winterfield community has been doing some amazing work. There are quite a lot of neighborhoods that are doing some wonderful things. And I'm also thinking of Burtonwood off of Monroe Road. They don't stop doing projects. They love working together.
Do you think it's more important for a community to work together and process an issue, or more important to solve the issue?
One of my mottos is the process is the product. Getting to know people is really the goal. The product is always nice, and people want to see a product at the end. But for me, the most important thing is that people feel good as they go through it. Process is really important for us.
Tom, the overriding discussion in the city right now is economic mobility. There is an assertion that the neighborhood you are born into largely decides outcomes in life. What role is your department taking in economic mobility efforts?
Our department runs the Mayor's Youth Employment Program. And one of the key factors in economic mobility is teenage labor force participation. When they looked at the Chetty study, that was one of the leading factors. So we are now doing job fairs almost every 2 months to help kids connect to the world of work directly through jobs. And we're finding great uptakes from employers and also from kids finding work. A lot of kids need a job, and kids that have jobs tend to stay in school, graduate, and go on to do better work. And most people that you talk to who are successful had jobs in high school and jobs in college. It might not be the job they're in today. I worked in Baskin Robbins and in a box factory, but they were jobs. We also want to connect them to their career interests, because a lot of kids grow up in communities where they don't have much exposure. They've never been in a doctor's office. They've never been in a law building. They've never been in a high rise. So just getting them to see themselves in those spaces helps them envision that they could be there. And so we do a lot of work to place kids in internships, and we do that for the entire school system of taking kids and get them into career relevant internships so that they can see themselves in the world of work. So that's our principal mechanism. Interestingly, just say another is people who are economically mobile tend to vote. That was one of the findings in the study. And as we began to unpack that, we began to think that voting sort of indicates a belief that your voice matters. And if you believe your voice matters, you'll advocate for yourself in your job, in your relationship with abuse. You'll advocate for yourself with your employer. You'll advocate for your child in the school. So voting matters, and encouraging people to participate is saying to them not just that you want them to vote, but that you believe that their voice matters. And that means a lot across all aspects of their lives, particularly for people who usually, in their experiences in their workplace, their voice has not mattered. So it's really important for us to listen to people. And so we just think giving people the empowerment to make their own decisions in neighborhoods is a part of that, is saying your voice matters. We're going to let you do what you want to do. And all those things sort of contribute to creating opportunity in people that will advocate and move forward.
Tom, if you had the resources, what one action would you take to improve neighborhoods in Charlotte?
Well, the thing that I've been looking at the most over the last several years has been looking at a commercial space, and particularly city markets. Years ago, we had problems in some of our neighborhoods with people that were selling on the side of the road, and we really cracked down on sort of informal sales. But we need places where people can regularize entrepreneurship, and we need city markets in our community. I just came back from Vietnam. But wherever you travel in the world, Vietnam, Europe, South America, markets are one of the first things that you visit. And they could be a really important part of Charlotte as well. What we have heard from most every neighborhood that I've worked in Charlotte has been that they wish that they had a stronger business district. There's some neighborhoods that are pretty successful, Dilworth and Cotswold, Plaza Midwood, and Noda. But after that, you begin to go to really distant suburbs of Mint Hill, Belmont, Mount Holly, Cornelius, and Davidson before you get a sense of place where people are really proud of their community and feel that their business district is serving them. And I think the city has a role, and many cities in America and across the world have roles that they play in creating those kinds of informal marketplaces where people can meet each other across difference, try out new ideas, and also provide food, which has been one of the great complaints that people have had in our low-income areas, that they're not served by grocery stores. So it provides entrepreneurship. It provides a mingling space where people can get together and have a cup of coffee or do something across all sorts of immigration, rural, urban differences, find food. I think the city has a real role to play in creating that kind of vitality in our community.
Tom, you've been working in distressed communities for 29 years, 20 years working on business district revitalization, and 9 years in neighborhood capacity building. What's changed in those 29 years?
The city has grown enormously in those 29 years, and people have become very interested in living in the city again. We were growing as a single-family community. We thought of ourselves as a single-family community when I came here. People who moved here to raise a family. It was all about a family. And now we are much more interested in younger people, and people are much more interested in living in urban lives, and people are much more interested in living in a more congested life. They're also really interested in things outside their homes. If you live in an urban area, the amenities that you have are not behind the gate of your old apartment complex. It's not your backyard pool or your apartment complex's pool. It's the city. And I think people are much more interested in how the city looks, how the city operates, and how they can make a real city now, not a suburban city, but a real city. So I think the challenges that we have now are how we create that city and change our focus of thinking from how we serve families to how we serve individuals.
Tom, I've heard you say, do what you can with what you have right now. What do you mean by that?
I've often talked with our staff that the enemy of good is perfect, that we can do so much with what we have, that it was always, if we had more time and we had more money and we had more people, we could always do better. But often what you have is enough to do something, and doing something is better than nothing. There's so many people. I had an aunt that had a beautiful home and beautiful silver and china, and everything was ready to entertain, but she never had the party. And you can go to someone's house, you can have a party, you can have people over. Your house doesn't have to be perfect for that to happen. And the same is true for so many things we do in the city. We need to have a meeting. We need to get people together. We push it out and we do our best. And doing something is better than waiting and waiting and waiting for perfect. And there's not the money or the time ever for perfection. So let's just get on with it. And that's what we do. And I hope it works. I think it works.
Tom, to know you is to know that you have a remarkable range of talents and skills and interests. You could do anything. Why do you do this work?
I'm a social person, and I was always really attracted to creating environments where people really like to be together. Initially, that sort of came out in terms of being an architect, building a house that someone really wanted, that was their dream home, or a building that was in their minds, their dream building, their ideal place to work or to have a retail. And then I began to think I was much more interested in how it came together as a city. How did we really build a community, a city that people love to be in? And that's sort of my professional journey had been through architecture into this city. I'm not a city planner, but I really work to see if we can't help inform and make a city that people love and that people love being in and being together. We don't move to the city to be isolated. We move to the city to be a part of a community. That really thrills me. My life is better when I'm with other people.
Tom, you do throw parties and you do bring people together. In your work, are you throwing one big party for the city?
I'm throwing a lot of little parties for the city, some big parties. We do a lot of events in the city, a lot of events, awards and galas. It's really important with volunteers, not just to have them work, but to celebrate what they're doing. And when you celebrate what they're doing, it encourages more people to do the work. It's a very virtuous cycle that really fits me really well, because I love to see people come together, and I love to see them celebrated, and I love seeing them smile and recognized for the work that they're doing. So it's great. And we have events all the time, and they are really important. It's a part of building community, is to get people together.
Tom, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina, for the most part. Ended up in high school in New Orleans, but Wilmington was where I spent a lot of my formative years, and where our family came back in the summers my entire life. We were always at Wrightsville Beach in the summertime.
What was formative about Wilmington?
Wilmington was a very conservative community, and Wilmington, when I was there, had semi-annual riots around the desegregation of the schools, the very famous riots with the Wilmington 10. My father was an anesthesiologist in town, but he was very vocal about his support for the desegregation of the schools and his lack of support for the Vietnam War. We were a Jewish family. It was a very progressive Jewish family. My father drove a Volkswagen Bug. My mother had a Volkswagen bus. They were very active in progressive causes and progressive politics. So I think I grew up knowing that the majority is not always right, that it's okay to stand on the side of a minority of people, and the minority could be correct. The other thing I think I learned from Wilmington is that people act from good intentions, and sometimes those good intentions come from a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding the world sufficiently. I had a lot of friends, I think, who really liked me, and they often were taking me to conversion classes because I was Jewish, and they didn't want me to go to hell. And I would say, I think I want to be with my family. If all my family is going to be in hell, I think I should be there with them. But that didn't satisfy them. But it was really that their world experiences couldn't enable them to accept that I might be able to have a different life. And that was also helpful for me as I began to work with my father and came out as a gay man. And my father was not happy with that at all. As a Jewish man who had gone through the Holocaust, he wanted to see his kids have big families. And he had never really been exposed to a person who was gay, who had had what he thought was a successful life. So many people that might be doing things that were successful and gay were closeted. And the stories of people that had been open really weren't told. So he didn't know anyone who was gay who was what he thought happy and successful. People that were gay weren't in his social circle. So his dislike of my being gay, I think, was really grounded in his not knowing an alternative path to happiness. And at one point, I actually sort of understood that finally and said, Dad, you're just like the people around us that are taking me to conversion classes. And that really stuck with him. And we got to a really different place in our relationship.
Tom, did you ever consider converting?
No, but I have often said that if they would put cheese on the crackers, I would really think about being Catholic. I like the wine and the cracker bit. I just thought that there'd been a lot of advances in hors d'oeuvres in the last 1,000 years. I was really happy with where I was. My family was very scientifically based. I was not particularly concerned about hell. So that was not a really big concern of mine.
Tom, you mentioned your father. How would you describe the Warshauer family?
The Warshauer family had been in eastern North Carolina for a long time. My grandfather had come over from Europe, gone to San Francisco. There was an earthquake. He got a one-way ticket to Wilmington, where he had some distant connections, and married my grandmother, who was one of a dozen children in Wilmington that had family many of the small towns around eastern North Carolina. We have relatives. And so the Warshauers in general were big family. We had houses and spent all of our summers together because we really weren't allowed to date people that weren't Jewish, and people that weren't Jewish really weren't allowed to date us. So we sort of hung out separately, and most all the Jewish community in Wilmington came to the foot of our street. My grandmother had parties most every day. But my father was sort of the black sheep inside that family. For the most part, they were all merchants and physicians and believed that it was really important to get along in the communities that they were in. And so stepping out, as my father was doing, was not really particularly accepted. They admired him, but they thought that he was putting his family at too much risk.
How is your father stepping out?
Well, in his advocacy for integration of the schools, and he spoke out against the Vietnam War. He spoke out against football, thought there were too many injuries. He spoke out against too many back surgeries. He spoke out against tonsillectomies, that too many children were having their tonsils removed. And he forced everyone in our family to have seatbelts installed in the cars before they were required. I wasn't allowed to drive in a car that didn't have seatbelts, so all my grandparents had to have seatbelts put in way before seatbelts were required. So he had his own ideas. Many of them were great ideas. It turned out to be the right ideas, but he was definitely an outlier. And as a result, we were as well. He also had long hair. So the rest of my family were very proper. They often had clothing stores, so they were very well dressed. And my family was argumentative, had long hair, and I think everyone thought that we were all going to be drug addicts and hippies. It's not exactly what happened, how it turned out, but that was sort of the perception of our family inside of Eastern North Carolina conservative culture.
And your mom and her family?
Well, my mom was from Charleston, and her mother was an exceedingly proper lady. My mother really broke away. She went to UNCG and then UNCC. She got involved with some very progressive ideas on campuses at UNC Chapel Hill. And then she moved, like many people that were interested in the world, she moved to New York. And she walked into the Federal Reserve and told them that they needed to hire her. Her friends were amazed that she got a job without connections, and she just said, I had the skills and I wanted to be a statistician, and she got the job. She grew up in a small town in South Carolina. She was from Charleston, but she grew up a part of her life in St. Matthews, which incidentally is like where Shepard Fairey, who did the Obama poster, came from, where Viola Davis, the famous actress, came from. So it's a town of just a couple thousand people, and had some very interesting people come out of it. And I think my mom is one of those interesting people that came out of a small town. So many people in the South that witnessed a political environment and a social environment that was far too stifling for them and went on to do some very interesting things. So you don't have to be from a big city to do something interesting. And so that's where she went.
Brothers or sisters?
I have a part of 5 siblings. I'm the middle child. I have 2 older brothers and a baby sister and a younger brother.
Middle children are sometimes lost in the pack. How did being a middle child inform who you are?
Lost in the pack is not a bad idea. I think as I grew up, I saw my family as kind of a crazy family. I liked them, but I sort of sought to fit in more. And I was always cleaning up the house. And there was that song about Lemon Pledge, very pretty. I was always dusting the furniture with Lemon Pledge. It smelled so good. And even the Formica furniture, I didn't really know the difference between wood and real wood. So I wanted us to fit in, and that was a part of who I was as a kid. Between that and then my parents let me have a go-kart, and I was always out riding on my go-kart.
A go-kart and Lemon Pledge.
Yes, it's a little contradictory, but you can handle it.
Tom, at the age of 15, your family moved to New Orleans. What was that move like for you?
Well, my father was having a really hard time making things work in Wilmington. He worked for a hospital system, and they didn't particularly like the idea of someone who was as outspoken as he was. And so despite his other family connections, he had a brother that was a doctor. It was not going to work in Wilmington. So he took a job in New Orleans, and he came and told us that we were moving. And I was so excited to get out of Wilmington. I could not wait to leave. I think he felt that we would be devastated, but I was just incredibly excited to leave. Conversion classes were fine. All of that was okay. But I was ready for a bigger city. I wanted to get out of Wilmington, and I was thrilled. So New Orleans was great for me. And I ended up going to Ben Franklin High School, which was a high school for kind of gifted kids. And it was just a perfect environment for me. I loved it. The facilities were awful. We didn't have a gymnasium. We didn't have a cafeteria. We didn't have a sports team. One year, they scored 0 points through the entire football season. We didn't get a score until basketball. That was a school for me. And I was incredibly happy. Even though there was no air conditioning, it was just a great school. And everyone in New Orleans who could sort of get into the school went. So it was a great assortment of people that were there.
Here you are in New Orleans as a teenage young man exploring his sexual identity. What was that like for you?
Well, New Orleans was an amazing place with the French Quarter, with their drinking, with Mardi Gras. it was really an amazing place to be in high school for me. So I loved my high school, and I was a popular kid in high school. I was beau of my AZA, one of the Jewish chapters. I was really having a great time in school. But I was also getting to know myself and explore myself in New Orleans. And the French Quarter was not far. My parents were pretty permissive about how late I could stay out. So I got to know the city really well. I can tell you a line that I've often used.
Yes, tell me.
Is that I was never great looking. So I was never intimidating to anybody. But I was always good enough that after the great people left, I was a really good second choice. And so no one was intimidated to ask me anything. That's a nice place to be. New Orleans was wild. It still is a wild place. Anything goes. And it was a great place for me. When I was in high school in New Orleans, I thought in order to be a successful gay man, I had to learn to like opera. And so I started ushering at the opera. I didn't particularly like opera, but I really liked intermission. And it was really fun to see everybody there. And it was just an amazing event. I can stop there, but I can tell you one other story. There was one time I was sitting in my seat after we'd finished ushering because we got to sit down. And I got a note from backstage from one of the singers that I should meet him afterwards. It was really fun to go to these events. You just never knew what was going to happen. That was not what was happening in Wilmington. In New Orleans, it was mixed up in that way. We lived in a salt and pepper neighborhood. New Orleans had integrated neighborhoods, old integrated neighborhoods. Everything in New Orleans was much, much freer than anything that I had ever experienced. And it was a great place for me. I always say I was sort of raised in Wilmington, but I grew up in New Orleans. I loved it. I still love that city. But I realized even when I was in New Orleans that I could not drink enough to live in New Orleans full time.
Tom, you went to Rice University and studied architecture. Why Rice? Why architecture?
Well, I was really interested in architecture. I had an uncle that I admired a lot, my mother's brother, that was an architect. Architecture really fit my personality, the sort of lemon pledge aspect of my personality, the anal compulsiveness, making sure that the environment that you were in was one that was beautiful, really fit who I was. And so architecture was sort of a natural for me. And I looked at a lot of different schools where I could do architecture or could study architecture. And there was a lot that was happening in Houston. Houston was one of the big booming cities at the time. And every architect that was doing anything in the world was doing a building in Houston. So Rice was very well known, having a great architecture program. Rice is also really known as a great school that's very affordable. So the cost for going to Rice was about the same as out-of-state tuition in any other public school. So when I took a look at NC State versus Rice, it was about the same in terms of cost. And Louisiana schools, because I was in Louisiana at this time, weren't really an option for me. I wasn't going to go to LSU in Baton Rouge. So Rice really fit the picture for me. And it was a pretty good place for me. It was a bit too conservative and a bit too corporate. So after 2 years at Rice, I took a year off and went to school at the Architectural Association in London, which gave me an opportunity to really see architecture from a different perspective. I didn't think I wanted to be a corporate architect. And Rice, I felt, was much more on track to a certain kind of office building architect. And I wanted to see a little bit more of the world. London gave me that perspective. I got to study with Charles Jinks and Richard Rogers, who had just opened Centre Pompidou and Beaubourg in Paris, and really see a different way of thinking about buildings and thinking about the role of the architect in buildings. I think that Centre Pompidou was probably one thing that got me interested in the urban qualities, because one of the things the architect did in that building is he had them open up the library in the evening. And it was the first time in Paris that they had evening hours for working people to go to the library. And that had been an architectural decision, not just a programmatic decision from the library. At least that's how it was represented to us. So thinking of the architect, not just designing the library, but actually thinking about how it's used and who uses it and when they use it, got me really thinking really differently about what was the role of the architect in designing and creating buildings.
After graduating from Rice, you stayed in Houston and practiced architecture. What kind of work did you do?
I graduated from Rice, And then I did a preceptorship year in Chicago with SOM, and then came back to Rice for my 5th year professional degree. And a part of coming back was I had a Jameson Fellowship to study American Decorative Arts, and was very interested in what was happening at the turn of the century in decorative arts. And so I studied that while I was getting my 5-year degree in architecture. I was really interested in historic preservation. I really liked how people came together and what buildings meant, how people read buildings, how people read furniture, how people looked at material culture. And so I was very interested in sort of historic preservation and how cities were built, and how a collection of normal buildings could become much more than the individual buildings, could become a whole district and could really represent the culture in a different way, and how reuse of buildings could be done. And so when I was in Houston, I worked on the restoration at the time of one of the largest projects in the country. It was a 29-story golf building that we were restoring, which was sort of a look-alike of Empire State Building, just at the top of the crenulated tops. So it was really fun to be involved in big restoration projects. And I also did a lot of smaller restoration projects for people in their homes in Houston.
This interest in restoration brought you back to Wilmington.
Right. In the mid-'80s, oil crashed, and it was really impossible to do anything in Houston. Architecture stopped, development stopped, money stopped. And I got a call from some friends in North Carolina that said I-40 had been funded to Wilmington. And I thought, that city is going to change with I-40 going into it. Could be more like a Charleston. It's going to really grow. It's going to open up. And I thought, I want to be a part of that. So I moved back to Wilmington to restore houses in downtown. My grandfather had been a builder, a small-time builder in Wilmington, and we had one of his properties, and I wanted to restore what he had built. It was the first house he had built in Wilmington. And I ended up doing quite a number of small restoration projects in downtown Wilmington.
In fact, these are still homes that you own to this day?
Most all of them I still have.
Tom, in 1988, you decided to pursue a master's degree. Where did you go, and what did you study?
Well, I gotten to the point in Wilmington that I had kind of borrowed all that I was going to be able to borrow. And I thought if I was going to understand real estate development, I needed to get a better education in it. I'd also began coughing so much from all the exposure to dust and restoration of houses that doctors told me I either had to start wearing a mask or get a desk job. So it was time to get a desk job. So I went to school at MIT and studied, got a master's in real estate development, which was a phenomenal program to be able to be in and to really learn sort of what was going on in real estate and how to think about real estate in a different way than I was thinking about it.
What was your time like in Boston?
Boston was an amazing time for me. The people in my program were, for the most part, all sort of mid-career. So it wasn't like they had to be in school. They wanted to be in school. They wanted to learn. And school had really changed. It was really more about doing things in groups than individual learning that I had gone through at Rice. These were really group projects. And real estate is really, for the most part, a team endeavor. And so I was really busy with my class. My classmates were phenomenal and fascinating people. I met some other people in Boston, and many of those I still keep up with and some of my best friends today.
In 1990, with your MIT degree in hand, you moved to Charlotte. Why Charlotte, and what were your plans?
As I was graduating school, I began to look for where I would want to live. And I thought I would be great if I could find something closer to home. I didn't have to be in Wilmington, but I wanted to be somewhere in the Carolinas and closer to my family. Far enough that we didn't have to drop in every day, but close enough that I could see people on the weekends. And Charlotte really fit the bill. They were looking for someone to help with economic development. They were getting ready to build a convention center. My thesis had been on the impact of convention centers in major cities. It was something I was very interested in, and it was a good match for me to come here. I was really interested in how public-private partnerships developed and how they were done. And Charlotte was an up-and-coming city. Wendell White, who was the city manager at the time, was an amazingly impressive guy. And when I came and talked with him, I believed that he was someone that really thought public service was a very noble profession. And he was a real spokesperson for city employees. He was an amazing city manager. And I was delighted to work with him and Larry Rosenstrauch, who was the head of economic development, was also an incredible guy, brilliant man. And so the opportunity to work with them and looking at public-private partnerships and helping to create a city was really interesting, because many of the other places I might have gone were cities where you were more maintaining the city than creating one. And Charlotte was all about, what could you bring to this city and how could you help us make a great city here?
You began working for the city of Charlotte. How long did you anticipate working for the city?
I thought I would be in Charlotte for 2 years and not one day more. Actually, on my way over to look for a place to live, I went back to Wilmington for another couple of days, and I thought, it's 2 years and not one day more, and I think I can find a place a lot faster than I had thought. I was told to go live in Fourth Ward. That was a happening place, and I should get an apartment there. So finding a place to live was pretty easy. I didn't intend to stay here a long time. Thought it would be a good place for me to get some awareness and then to move on to something else. It was, to me, a little bit of another automobile-oriented city like Houston, and I had already done the ringed flat city, and I was ready for a city that might have more character to offer.
Here it is 29 years later. You're still working for the city of Charlotte. Why do you think it worked out that way?
I think I found that this was a city I really liked. There are a lot of people here that were as interested in social equity as I was. This was a city that wanted to lift all boats. They were really concerned about developing programs that enabled everyone to participate in the prosperity of the community. And that's something I was really interested in. So there was a good match. They let me develop a lot of new programs around renovation in historic districts and economic development that was small scale. I loved doing that. I loved being able to be a part of connecting people and helping us build a city together. So I wanted to stay. I also got tired. I had moved around quite a bit. I was tired of moving. I wanted to have old friends.
Tom, you have been doing this work for almost 30 years. When you reflect back on that career, what are you most proud of?
I look back at a lot of things where I think I made a difference. I'm proud today of many of the people that I get to work with and shepherding them and helping them develop their careers. I was particularly proud of working on things like getting the historic trolley working in South End, which I think really helped to lead to the establishment of light rail. We were able to negotiate the use of the rail right-of-way, which people didn't think would happen at that time, which really opened us up to thinking about the entire corridor. I worked with Ruth Lyons and Paul Sayers, who owned Center of the Earth Gallery, which was a gallery out in Noda. And we did a lot of work to help develop the gallery crawl and help make that happen long before light rail was happening, to really create a community in that area of town. At the time, we thought there was no study that we could do that would support that a restaurant would ever happen in Noda. There was just not the money for anyone to eat out. There was only the money for people to drink at Pat's Time for one more. But restaurants got going and coffee shops got to happen. And so we really were able to make a difference there. And I was able to work with the North Carolina Arts Council. I got a grant to bring public art to our streetscape projects. So for the first time, we were putting public art. The first ones that we did were the column and the little house that you see at the Thomas Street parking lot in Plaza Midwood. And that led to us being able to do public art and incorporate public art and all of our streetscape projects after that. So I'm particularly proud of being able to introduce new programs and to really lift up the voices, I think, of people that were not being heard at that time so that they could get their projects off the ground and really change the trajectory of a number of these communities.
Tom, have you ever thought of doing different work than the work you're doing now?
There are times I have thought about sort of doing more development work on my own, but I have really loved the work that I get to do. I didn't come at it from an MPA background thinking I was going to make a career in government. I really wanted to do a lot of the work I was doing, which was lifting up voices and helping people in communities build real communities that they loved. I was able to do that for the first 20 years in commercial districts and now more in residential areas. And I have loved that. I've had opportunities to look at other cities and to look at things that were more downtown oriented. But for the most part, big business people get what they want in downtown areas. I was more interested in helping people that didn't have a voice get the things that they needed in areas outside of uptown.
Tom, when you were young, you did a great deal of renovation work. Have you ever wanted to do that work again?
Oh, yeah. I loved working on houses. I often sort of doodle about what that might look like. Now I do that more just for myself or for my family, and I'm okay with that. But there are many times I think it would be fun to go back out and start doing that again. And then I think when I was doing it, I was 30, and now I'm substantially older, and maybe it wouldn't work out so well. And an older person to be doing some of the things I was doing as a young kid.
Tom, as you look back on your life, is there a thought that guides you?
I think one thing I have seen in some of my work at the city, and I think I saw with my dad, is that you don't always get to harvest the fruit that you plant. There were things I did with the city around domestic partner benefits for the LGBT community in the late 90s, but we didn't get those rights for another 10 years, and it was another group of people that really drove it at that time. There were things with light rail. There were a number of places where you do a lot of work, and right now I'm doing a lot of work with farmers markets. I'm sort of tilling the soil, I feel. And maybe I'll get to harvest the fruit, maybe I won't. But that's all okay. Doesn't mean that I have to be there to harvest the fruit. I have a brother that put in all the trees on his street. He thought his street should be covered in trees like Queens Road in Wilmington, and he planted about half a mile of trees in front of everyone's house on that street. And then I discovered that a grandfather of mine had done the same thing in St. Matthews. He'd planted all the street trees. I thought they may not live to see that, but that's a lot of what many of us do. We work with our children. We don't always see our great-grandchildren or our grandchildren. But a lot of the work I do with this city is creating an environment and tilling the soil so that in the future things might be better. And that's okay. That if it doesn't work out that I get to see it, it's still okay that I got to be a part of getting things planted.
Tom, you are a social person. Is there something that you've learned in relationships that has become important to you in life?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've learned is that it's okay for people to be with you for a night, to be with you for a week, and to be with you for several years, and then to move on. That you can have incredibly meaningful relationships that are very short durations that impact you forever, or that are longer that impact you forever. But for me, the relationships that I have sort of stay with me for a long, long time. And I'm really fortunate to get along and to still love and be in love with many of my old boyfriends. I think that our paths cross. Sometimes they stay together for some time, and sometimes those times are shorter, but any of those are still wonderful and meaningful. And I love those and cherish them. And so that's a part of who I am and who I have been.
Tom, what do you value most?
I love people, and I really love diversity in people. I love people just being able to be themselves, whoever they are. I love people feeling free that they can be whoever they are. And that's probably the thing I value most, is people being authentic and being who they are. And I don't care if they're really great or not, just that they're happy with what they're doing. One of the things I was realizing is that, I love to sort of sing and dance and garden, but I'm not good at any of those things. It's fortunate I don't have to earn a living in any of those things. But that doesn't mean that I can't have a good time doing it. And so I think we ought to sort of lose a lot of our inhibitions and allow ourselves to enjoy who we are without having to feel that we're always being judged by that. And that it's okay to sing with a bad voice. It's okay for your plants to die if you give them a shot. It's okay to dance badly. Be nice if you're not videoed when that's happening. But you should have fun. And I think we should have fun in our lives and enjoy each other.
Thank you for your time today, Tom.
You're welcome.
Tom Warshauer earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Architecture and Fine Arts from Rice University and a Master of Arts in Real Estate from MIT. And now, a personal word. Tom Warshauer has a twinkle in his eye. He has a mischievous grin. He is a good time about to happen. I imagine Tom in New Orleans at night. I imagine him at the opera during intermission. He loves people, and people love him. There is a tradition in literature of the young man from the provinces who comes to the city. The city is marvelous from afar. The lights are bright. Towers reach toward the sky. The city is a place of adventure and fortune, of interest and civilization. Dreams can be realized. The young man gets off the carriage, or the car, or the bus, or the train with just his backpack and ambition and charm. Now he is on the streets, naive and curious, making his way, encountering the denizens of the city, the fashionable, the homeless, the hucksters, the swindlers, the lovers, the mentors, the allies, the friends. There is grit and grime to the city up close. There is danger at night. The city is sin. The city is money. The city is sex. The young man becomes experienced. He trades. He makes deals. He falls in love. He ages slowly and then quickly in the great salons of conversation. As his life comes to an end, he regrets and raises a glass to the decisions he has made. At the station, the next young man from the provinces arrives, with wonder and hope in hand. In Volume 3, Number 4 of Lapham's Quarterly, critic Jamie James writes about the literature that expresses the myth of the city, the quest narrative of the handsome man stifled in the provinces who was taken up by the metropolis. Balzac wrote Lost Illusions about an ambitious poet from the countryside who finds lovers in Paris and is ruined by the temptations of pleasure and fame. The French do not flinch about the human condition. The English are interested in the gravitational pull of London. The character David Copperfield says this upon arrival in the capital of empire: "What an amazing place London was to me when I saw it in the distance, and how I vaguely made it out in my mind to be fuller of wonders and wickedness than all the cities of the earth." Americans have their own tales of the city. John Dos Passos writes in his novel Manhattan Transfer about the development of urban life from the Gilded Age to the Jazz Age. It is a series of overlapping stories that portray New York City as merciless, yet teeming with energy and restlessness. A young man from a small town steps off a ferry onto Manhattan and searches for Broadway, wanting to get to the center of things. The center of things is the lure of the city. It is where we confront and can create a whole new identity. Louis Lapham, editor of Lapham's Quarterly, says this in his opening essay entitled City Light in the same issue on the city. What suburban opinion deplores as abomination, traffic, crime, noise, confiscatory taxes, extortionate rents, the urban disposition regards as the price of escape from the tyranny of the small-town majority, as the cost of the blank canvas on which to discover the portrait of oneself. The great cities of the world have always lured us in. Whether Rome or Carthage, whether Paris or Madrid, whether Chicago or San Francisco, whether Tokyo or Beijing. The historian Lewis Mumford wrote, "Mind takes form in the city, and in turn, urban forms condition the mind." New Orleans was the city of Tom Warshauer's awakening. It is a city that lends itself to literature and a city that lends itself to song. Every resident knows a streetcar named Desire. Every resident knows there is a house in New Orleans called the Rising Sun. New Orleans has been the ruin of many a poor boy. In thoroughly modern ways, we read stories now about single women trying to make it in the big metropolis. It began with Theodore Dreiser's city novel published in 1900 about a young woman from the provinces, Sister Carrie, who arrives in Chicago with $4 in her pocket, compromising her values to realize the American dream. Today, we read about smart and driven women who arrive in the city seeking friendship and love. We know the streets. We know the neighborhoods. The cities are familiar characters as important as the protagonists themselves. New York, London, Paris, Los Angeles, and Dublin. Secrets, confessions, fashion, offices, apartments, shops, cocktails, careers, and broken and mended hearts. Lapham ends his elegy about the city, noting that the urban future is the progenitor of the world's energy, and the locus of its desires. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners, and to my teammates, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, Art and Media Director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website, onlifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.